Hello, welcome to part 3 or lesson 3 in my series 100 Lessons from a Dominie's Log. So far, if you remember from the last lesson, we ended with Neill in a sense being a bit negative. He feels that the aim of education should be to create a new generation and to change the world for the better. But seeing places like Houndsditch, which is a very poor part of East London in 1914-15, he says, as long as Houndsditch remains, then what's the point? If we cannot change society and cannot solve the problems of poverty and the problems of the working class, then in a sense, why teach? If it's simply to maintain such a society. Anyway, the next day he writes, "I smile as I reread the words I wrote yesterday. For today I feel that hope has not left me. But I'm not any more hopeful about the 3 R's and the others. I am hopeful because I have found a solution. I shall henceforth try to make my bairns, my children, realise. Yes, realise is the word. Realise what? To tell the truth, I have some difficulty in saying. I think I want to make them realise what life means. Yes, I want to give them, or rather help them, to find an attitude. Most of the stuff I teach them will be forgotten in a year or 2, but an attitude remains with one throughout life. I want these boys and girls to acquire the habit of looking honestly at life." So this is Neill thinking about, why is he teaching? And the whole book, in fact, the whole book of Dominie's Log is this. He's thinking it through and he becomes hopeful, and then he becomes full of doubt, and then he becomes hopeful again. And he shows us. So it's a really good book in terms of expressing his inquiry and his exploration of those issues to do with why is he a teacher. To me, if you look at the modern books about teaching and about parenting and about behaviour control and about schools and about values, they don't show this. They don't show a teacher or a person in education exploring and expressing doubt about the very ideas that they're coming up with from day to day. So as a diary, it's a very good way of just thinking through some of these issues. And can I say that Neill succeeds through his humour. Neill doesn't just succeed in terms of his humanity, which is portrayed very well here, and his sense of exploration and getting it wrong and then getting it right and then maybe thinking he's got it wrong again. Apart from that, his humour is one of the greatest things that sells, in a way, his story. And throughout his life, I think it was. I think part of his fame came through that sense of humour and rather than anger. Because I'm angry when I read this, and then I think of our schools today. I get very angry. And when I do presentations on Summmerhill, a lot of the time I try and bring students with me so that the presentation is more the voice of the child than of me as a teacher at the school. And like one example was I took a group, 3 Summmerhillians I think it was, to Manchester. We were invited there as part of a seminar by researchers looking at participation and ways children learn through participation in their schools. And there were 2 schools that were there. It was me and the Summmerhillians students, 3 of them, and then there was this wonderful school which was the first cooperative funded school in the country, and their children presented about being a cooperative school funded by the co-op but also with cooperative values. And then my students presented and I sort of stood back. I did a bit of presentation in terms of history, and then 2 women in the audience attacked the children verbally by asking them about, well, could the democratic meeting at Summmerhill decide to make the school a state school, a school funded rather than private school? They had this huge issue about Summmerhill being private. And afterwards I was chatting to the teacher who brought the co-op school, the state co-op school, and he was swearing. about these women. He said, "How dare they?" And he was using words I can't use on this tape. And I told him that, look, you can't use these words because we're in a public space, and Summmerhill wouldn't even allow me to use them. Which was quite funny, but it was really good to get someone's support in this hostile environment in terms of these two women attacking Summmerhill. But why attack it? Because it's private. A.S. Neill set up this school because he'd had many years, or several years, as a pupil teacher, as a student teacher, and then as a teacher. Yeah, and he'd worked in the state system, and we find this from Gretna Green, that his whole ideas in the state system was about liberating the children, and yet how can he do it in the state system? Yeah? So he has to do it ultimately in a private school because he has no other choice. Yeah? And remember, this is in 1921 when he sets up Summmerhill. So in the sense, the schools and what was private, what was state, what was fee paying, what wasn't, was still not fully organised. But yeah, and to me, because Neill will find out again and again in this book that Neill is angry about the poverty of the children that he's teaching. He's teaching Gretna Green, which has many children in his school who are the children of farm labourers, and farm labourers didn't own the houses they were in. They were part of the landowner. Yeah, and the children would never get funding to go to university or to college or to go anywhere else. They would just become the wives of other farm labourers and farm labourers themselves. And they were also taken out of school, yeah, in order to work the farm, in order to work in terms of the harvest and other things. And Neill was very, very angry at the destruction of the children he taught because of child labour and this is why he talks about Houndsditch. Yeah? And he's not the only one. The whole history of this type of education which is child-centred, of education which is about joy of learning and assumes a child is inquisitive, didn't come from wealthy private schools. Those were the ones that were linked to universities and standard education. They might have had leadership, but they were trying to get their students into universities. The ones that tried to address the issue of poverty were Maria Montessori at the beginning. She worked in a working class housing association. That's where she set up her first Casa di Bambini. Clara Grant was a primary school teacher in East London, using Montessori methods and other methods in order to mainly play and making toys with East London children. These are the poorest children in East London. Margaret Macmillan, who was campaigning for nursery schools for all, and she worked with children in East London, I think in Dagenham. And she set up the first sort of nurses and doctors within schools. You had the settlement movement was full of projects and ideas and people who wanted to support the working class and the poorest of the poor, and part of that was through creating an education system which liberated the child. So how dare anyone attack these schools and the history of these schools and the remnants of those schools that still exist, like Summmerhill, simply because they had to be private in the end in order to survive an education system that was so much ultimately and now against the values of those schools. Anyway, after that bit of diatribe, I'm going to finish by reading some more of Dominie's log. I wonder if I look honestly at life myself. Am I not a very one-sided man? Am I not a socialist? This is Neill, remember? A doubter, a heretic? Am I not biased when I judge men like the Cecils and Harmsworths, these sort of upper-class wealthy men? I admit it, I am a partisan, and yet I try to look at life honestly. I try, and that is the main point. I do not think that I have any of the current superstitions about morality and religion and art. I try to forget names. I try to get at essentials, at truth. The fathers of my bands, my children, are, I think, interested in names. I wonder how many of them have sat down saying, quote, I must examine myself so that I may find out what manner of human being I am, unquote. I hold that self-knowledge must come before all things. When one has stripped off all the conventions and superstitions and the hypocrisies, then one is educated. What a wonderful way to end our third lesson from our Dominie's log. We must strip away our arrogances and our dogmas, and we must question and find out who we are as students and children, but possibly also as teachers. Thank you.